When I first moved to this small, secluded town, I heard the rumors. You know the kind. Whispers that float around like smoke. Stories that people only half believe, but still avoid. The kind of stories that settle into the atmosphere, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the trees or the hills. But this story, the one about the cabin in the woods, was different. It wasn't a rumor you could easily dismiss. Everyone had heard of it. Everyone. It was the kind of story that had been passed down for generations, like a local legend. The cabin sat deep in the woods, just a few miles out of town. It wasn't on any map, not that anyone had ever been able to find the cabin on a map. There were no signs, no trail markers, nothing. It was as if the forest itself had hidden it on purpose. And according to the townsfolk, anyone who had ever tried to find it had disappeared. That's what they said anyway. At first, I thought it was just superstition, a strange little ghost story that small towns love to tell. But then, the more I asked, the more I heard the same thing. No one who had gone out there ever came back. It didn't matter if it was summer or winter, day or night. Those who ventured too close to the woods, looking for the cabin, ended up vanishing without a trace. I remember the first time I heard someone talk about it seriously. I was sitting at the local diner trying to get a feel for the town when an older man with a grizzled face and a deep, gravelly voice leaned in close, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke in a hushed tone. "Don't go near those woods," he said. "Not unless you want to disappear." I couldn't tell if he was joking, but the look in his eyes made it clear that he wasn't. He'd spoken in a way that made my skin prickle, his words hanging heavy in the air, like they were wrapped in truth, something undeniable. I tried to laugh it off, but there was a tension in the room that I couldn't shake. It was like everyone knew something I didn't. And that's when I started to pay attention. I began noticing things. People who didn't talk about the cabin, but their eyes darted away when it was mentioned. Folks who quickly changed the subject if you asked them about the woods. It was like everyone knew the unspoken rule. Don't talk about it, and it won't be real. But I wasn't afraid. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Stories, myths, rumors. I believed in logic. And logic told me there had to be a reasonable explanation. People hadn't just vanished. There had to be a reason. That was my mistake. It wasn't long before my curiosity got the better of me. The more people tried to steer me away from the subject, the more I felt the need to uncover the truth. What was it about this cabin in the woods that made everyone so nervous? What really happened to the people who went searching for it? I had to know. One Saturday afternoon, after weeks of hearing nothing but vague warnings and cryptic advice, I decided to do something about it. I packed a small bag with essentials, water, snacks, and my trusty flashlight. The woods were dense, and I had heard it was easy to get lost. So I also brought along a map I'd drawn after some careful research. I figured it was just a cabin, nothing more than a long-forgotten piece of history, a relic of the past. As I headed out of town, the air began to shift. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the narrow dirt road that led into the forest. The town behind me seemed to fall away quickly, leaving only the forest ahead. The trees grew thicker as I moved deeper into the woods, their towering trunks blocking the fading light. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. But I pressed on. The map I had made seemed to guide me well, the old gnarled trees looking strangely familiar, as if they had been waiting for me. My mind tried to dismiss the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I was fine. I was just looking for an old cabin. There was no danger. That's what I kept telling myself. It was nearly dusk when I reached a clearing, and there it was, the cabin. At first, I thought it was an illusion, a mirage that the forest had conjured up just to play tricks on me. But no, it was real. The cabin stood at the edge of the clearing, weathered and covered in moss. The walls were warped with age, the roof sagging slightly, but it was unmistakably a structure that had been here for a long time. There were no windows, just small, boarded-up holes where they once were. The front door hung loosely on its hinges, a dark void waiting to be explored. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to push away the gut-wrenching feeling that had settled in my stomach. The air felt heavier here, the shadows deeper. The quiet that had surrounded the woods now felt like a warning. I knew I should turn around. I should leave. But my feet didn't listen. I stepped toward the door, the creaking of the wood beneath my boots, the only sound in the otherwise silent night. With one hand, I slowly pushed the door open. The air inside was musty, thick with the scent of decay and age. It was dark, the only light coming from the dimming sky outside. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door creaked loudly as I stepped inside the cabin, the faint light from outside barely illuminating the interior. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, protesting with every movement I made. It felt like the cabin was alive, as though it was waiting for me to enter. The air inside was thick, musty, and stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and rot. The walls, once probably painted a bright color, were now peeling and worn, the wood warped and buckling with age. Dust floated in the air like a thick fog, almost suffocating. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a sudden wave of unease wash over me. The rumors came flooding back, the stories of missing people, of strange things happening in this very cabin. I quickly pushed the thoughts aside. I was here to uncover the truth, and this was just a cabin. As I made my way deeper into the room, my flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing odd marks and strange symbols that had been scratched into the wood. They were faded, almost hidden, as though someone didn't want them to be seen. But the further I looked, the clearer they became. Some symbols were ancient-looking, others seemed more modern, hastily scrawled in a dark, irregular pattern. I ran my fingers across one of the symbols, feeling the rough texture of the etching. It didn't feel like just graffiti. It felt like markings, deliberate, intentional. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. What was this place? What was I standing in? I moved deeper into the cabin, drawn by a strange pull. There was a large wooden table in the center of the room, its surface worn and scarred with what looked like deep gouges. Papers, books, and old trinkets were scattered across it, abandoned like forgotten relics. I flicked through some of the papers, but most were too faded to read, their ink smudged and unreadable. One piece, however, caught my eye. It was a faded map drawn with ink that had bled over the years. I spread it out carefully on the table and shined my flashlight on it. The map showed the surrounding area, the woods, the town, and a marked spot that looked eerily familiar. It was near the town's border, deep in the woods, right where the cabin stood. But what made it unsettling were the symbols drawn around that spot. the same strange symbols I had seen etched into the walls of the cabin. I felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just an abandoned cabin. It was part of something larger, something older, something dangerous. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, soft but distinct. I froze. A faint scraping sound echoed through the room like nails on wood, coming from the corner. My heart raced. I turned around slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but saw nothing. The shadows were just that. Shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in this place. I took a step backward, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw it. An old, rusted iron door at the back of the cabin, almost hidden behind a pile of old furniture. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dark stairwell leading down into the earth below. The map had led me here. It wasn't just the cabin. It was what lay beneath it. The door to the basement was old, its metal frame rusted and bent with age. The hinges creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the noise echoing in the stillness of the cabin. I could feel the temperature drop as soon as the door opened, a chill creeping up my spine. The darkness below was suffocating, the air thick and damp, as if the very earth beneath the cabin was holding its breath. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. My flashlight barely pierced the deep shadows of the stairwell, and I felt the weight of something heavy pressing on me. I had come this far. I couldn't back down now. But a cold dread lingered in the pit of my stomach, an instinct that told me this wasn't going to be the simple exploration I had imagined. The stairs creaked underfoot as I descended slowly, my flashlight beam flicking from one step to the next. The air grew colder with every step, and a faint, musty odor filled my nostrils, something that smelled like rot, like long-forgotten things buried in the earth. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to stave off the cold, but it didn't help. The chill seemed to crawl beneath my skin, wrapping around me like a vice. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, stone-walled room. The floor was uneven, covered in layers of dust and debris. The room smelled worse here, the air thick with decay. My flashlight caught glimpses of broken furniture, old crates, and what looked like piles of discarded cloth. But it was the center of the room that caught my attention. In the middle of the floor was an altar. It wasn't a grand ceremonial structure, but a crude affair made of rough stone slabs, each one chipped and weathered by time. The surface was stained, dark splotches of what looked like dried blood. Strange symbols had been carved into the altar, matching the ones I had seen in the cabin. I took a cautious step closer, my heart thudding in my chest. My mind raced with questions. What was this place? Who had built this altar? And why was it here, hidden beneath the cabin? As I examined the altar more closely, my flashlight flickered and then dimmed, casting the room into deeper shadows. I twisted the knob, trying to get it to work, but it wouldn't respond. Panic bubbled up in my chest as I felt the growing pressure of the darkness around me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a strange sense of unease washed over me. And then I heard it again, the scraping sound, louder now, as if it was coming from inside the walls. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was accompanied by a low, guttural whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "You should have left." I turned sharply, my flashlight now useless in my trembling hands. The shadows seemed to move, shifting unnaturally along the walls. A cold breeze brushed against my skin, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I wasn't alone. I turned back to the altar, feeling the weight of the room closing in on me. Whatever had been left behind here, whatever had happened in this place, it wasn't over. The feeling in my gut was undeniable. Something had been awakened, and it was waiting. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the basement. My flashlight flickered again, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, hungry and alive. I could feel the weight of the presence behind me, a force that didn't belong, a thing that had been waiting in this forsaken place for far too long. I had thought that by entering this cabin, by digging deeper into its mysteries, I was merely uncovering the past, but I was wrong. I had opened something, and now I wasn't sure I could close it. The room seemed to spin as I looked around for some way out, my mind racing. The altar at the center of the room felt like it was pulling me toward it, the symbols on its surface now appearing more alive, shifting in the dim light. It was as if they were watching, knowing that I had come too far to turn back. I backed away, but the scraping sound intensified. It was no longer coming from the walls. It was coming from the floor, from beneath the earth itself. I didn't know why, but I crouched, my hands trembling as I touched the ground. There was something there, a coldness, a faint vibration, as if something was stirring deep beneath the cabin's foundations. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what I was feeling wasn't just a shift in the air. It was the sensation of something alive, something moving. You shouldn't be here. The voice was clearer now, not a whisper, but a deep, guttural growl. It came from the ground itself, a sound that resonated deep in my chest. I jumped to my feet, panic flooding my system. My flashlight flickered once more, casting its weak beam around the room, landing on an old, weathered book lying on the altar. Something about it pulled me in like a magnetic force. It wasn't just any book, it was a journal, its pages yellowed with age, its cover cracked and worn. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I reached out and touched it. The moment my fingers brushed against the leather, the temperature in the room dropped. My breath clouded in the sudden chill, and the whispers turned into a low, unintelligible chant. I opened the book carefully, the pages brittle and delicate. The first few pages were filled with dense, handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize. But the more I flipped, the more the letters began to make sense. The words were in a kind of old dialect, but they were written in Latin, a language I had studied in college. It didn't take long for me to realize what I was reading. The journal detailed a ritual, a dark, forbidden ritual designed to bind something ancient, something that had been trapped beneath the cabin for centuries. The symbols on the altar, the strange occurrences, the disappearances, all of it was part of the same twisted ceremony. The ritual described how the cabin was built as a prison for a creature, something not of this world, something that had been bound by generations of people who lived in this very town. But the ritual required a sacrifice, a descendant of the original builders, to maintain the binding. The last of those descendants, the final guardian, had failed. I had come here. I had opened the door. I was the next sacrifice. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing as the world around me seemed to spin. The floor beneath me trembled, and the whispers rose into a maddened chorus. It was coming. The air in the basement felt thick, suffocating, as though it had turned into something tangible, something that could grab hold of you and never let go. My body trembled, my mind racing with the terrifying realization that the stories weren't just stories. The cabin, the altar, the whispers, they were all part of something real. I looked down at the journal in my hands, the cold leather now feeling more like a warning than an artifact. It described a binding ritual that had kept the creature trapped for centuries, but that was no longer enough. The final words in the journal haunted me. The last bloodline, the final keeper, will break the cycle or perish. I couldn't shake the weight of those words. Perish. Was I the one the ritual had been waiting for? Was I meant to be the final sacrifice? It seemed too absurd to be true, but deep down, I knew that the events unfolding in this cabin weren't a coincidence. The ground beneath me rumbled again, this time more violently. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as the low growl of something large reverberated through the walls. My legs felt weak, as if they might give way at any moment. The basement, once an ordinary space filled with cobwebs and old junk, now felt like the belly of something dark and alive. The walls groaned, the wood creaking, as though the very structure of the cabin was being torn apart from the inside. A sound like nails scraping against metal grew louder, more intense, until I realized it wasn't just the walls or the floor. It was beneath me, beneath the very foundation of the cabin. I backed away from the altar, my flashlight flickering, casting long, erratic shadows around the room. The floorboards began to shake, then splinter. The ground in the center of the basement buckled, cracking wide open, sending debris flying in every direction. A putrid stench, like rotting flesh and sulfur, filled the air, making my stomach churn. The thing beneath the cabin was alive, and it was awakening. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My feet felt frozen to the floor, and as the ground cracked open further, the air grew thick with something malevolent. A massive, twisted form began to rise from the earth itself. Its limbs were grotesque, elongated, and covered in black, leathery skin that seemed to ripple with a sickening pulse. The creature's face was the last thing to emerge from the hole. It was a horror of shifting features, part human, part something else entirely. Its eyes were too large, gleaming with an unnatural predatory light. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to stretch impossibly far. A low, guttural screech filled the room, vibrating through my bones. I should have run. I should have turned and fled the cabin, but something held me there. The creature was staring directly at me, its eyes locking with mine in a way that felt like it was reading my very soul. "You opened the door," it hissed, its voice deep and raspy, echoing in the pit of my stomach. "You brought me back." I took a step back, my chest tight, my body refusing to obey. It was like I had no control over my actions anymore. The creature had broken free, and the reality of what I had done slammed into me with full force. There was no escape now. The only thing I could do was fight. But how do you fight something that was never meant to exist? How do you face a creature that has been trapped for centuries? Something that has only one purpose: to consume? I couldn't breathe. My entire body was frozen, not just from fear, but from something darker, a force that seemed to reach out from the creature, holding me in place. The room around me had disappeared, and all that existed was the creature, its pulsating, grotesque form rising from the ground like some ancient nightmare clawing its way to freedom. You opened the door. The voice echoed in my mind again, deep and dark, a sound that rattled every bone in my body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. It took a step forward, and the ground beneath me seemed to crack with the force of its movement. The smell in the room, rotting, sulfuric, like something from the deepest pits of hell, grew stronger, almost unbearable. It felt like the air itself was thickening, pressing in on me from all sides. "You are the last," it said, its voice hissing through the silence. "The final keeper, the one who will break the cycle." A cold, sinking feeling twisted in my stomach. I had read about this in the journal, the bloodline, the final keeper, the one who would break the curse or become part of it. I had been the one to open the door, to awaken whatever was trapped beneath the cabin. And now, the creature had its eyes on me. I forced myself to move. My legs shook with fear, but I managed to stumble backward, my eyes darting around the room for anything that could help. The journal had spoken of a way to end the curse, a ritual that could seal the creature away again. But I had no idea how to perform it, no clue how to reverse what I had unknowingly started. The creature moved again, its body shifting unnaturally as it slithered toward me. Every step it took sent a tremor through the floor, as if the earth itself was reacting to its presence. I backed toward the stairs, but my gaze kept drifting to the altar, the symbols etched into the stone, the same ones from the journal. If the ritual could be performed here, I had to do it, but I needed to act fast. The creature was almost upon me. The whispers in the air grew louder, chaotic, as if the very cabin itself was alive, as if the walls were closing in. I could feel the presence of something ancient, something so powerful it could break me with a thought. My chest tightened as I scrambled to remember what I had read, what my grandmother's journal had said, the altar, the bloodline, the last keeper. Suddenly, the creature lunged. A scream tore from my throat as I dove to the side, barely avoiding its sharp claws as they scraped the floor, sending a shower of debris into the air. I hit the ground hard, my heart racing. The creature let out a low, menacing growl, its mouth snapping open, revealing rows of teeth that seemed far too large for its jaw. I scrambled to my feet, desperation pushing me forward. I couldn't die here, not like this. I had to finish what had been started, the ritual. I had to stop it, stop the creature before it consumed everything. My mind raced. As I pushed myself to my feet, the creature was right behind me now, its claws scraping the floor with an unnerving screech. I could feel its presence closing in, like the weight of the world was bearing down on me. There was no time to think. There was no time to hesitate. I needed to act. The altar. The journal had said the altar was where the ritual began, where it could be sealed away. I had no idea if I could complete the ritual, let alone understand the symbols carved into the stone. But it was my only chance. There was no plan B. I couldn't face this thing on my own, not without knowing what I was doing. I glanced over my shoulder as the creature lunged toward me, its mouth opening wide, its foul breath hot against my skin. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced my feet to move toward the altar, hoping the power in the cabin would somehow help me. The symbols on the altar glowed faintly, as if responding to my presence. I could feel their pull, an almost magnetic force drawing me toward them. I stepped closer, trembling, reaching out with one hand to touch the cold stone. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body. My heart skipped a beat, the power thrumming beneath my skin. "It's too late," the creature hissed, its voice low and menacing, vibrating through my bones. "You cannot stop me. You are mine now." I ignored its words, forcing myself to focus. The journal had mentioned something about blood. I had to use blood to complete the ritual, to seal the creature back into the earth. But whose blood? My own? I wasn't sure. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the blade of a knife I'd brought with me just in case. Without thinking, I pulled it out, the cold steel pressing against my palm. The creature was drawing closer now, its eyes locked onto mine, its face contorted in a grotesque grin. I could feel its hunger, its need to consume, but I couldn't let it win. I took a deep breath and sliced the knife across my palm. The pain was sharp and sudden, but it was nothing compared to the dread that churned in my gut. Blood dripped onto the altar, the dark red liquid seeping into the cracks of the stone. A flash of light exploded from the altar, blinding me. I stumbled back, my hands instinctively shielding my eyes. The air in the room felt like it was on fire, crackling with power. The creature screeched, a sound so loud and full of fury that it rattled my teeth. The light from the altar intensified, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and curling in response. I could feel the creature's presence being pushed back, its form flickering as if it were struggling against an invisible force. But it wasn't enough yet. The ritual wasn't complete. I had to finish it. With my bleeding hand, I placed my palm on the altar once again. I could feel the symbols beneath my touch shift, the ancient magic of the cabin reacting to the blood of the bloodline. I whispered the words I'd read in the journal, the strange incantation that had been passed down through generations. As I spoke, the power surged again, the cabin shaking, the walls groaning, as if something was trying to break free. "By the power of the bloodline," I said, forcing the words through my trembling lips, "I bind you to the earth. I seal you away." The creature screamed again, but this time it was weaker, its form flickering, disappearing as the light from the altar engulfed it completely. The moment the words left my mouth, the entire cabin seemed to shudder, as though the earth itself was responding to the ritual. The air around me thickened, and I felt the pressure of the darkness, the malevolent force pushing against me, trying to claw its way back. The creature's screams grew more frantic, more desperate, and I could feel it fighting, twisting against the binding, unwilling to return to the depths where it had been trapped for so long. I wasn't sure I had the strength to hold it. The light from the altar flared brighter, hotter, as if it were trying to consume everything in its path. My body felt like it was being pulled apart, the force of the magic threatening to tear me from the inside out. But I held on. I had to hold on. With every passing second, the creature's screeches grew more guttural, more savage. Its form flickered in and out of existence, like a bad image on a broken TV screen, its twisted body still struggling to break free. But it was weakening. The power of the ritual was working. The ground beneath me trembled violently, and for a moment, I thought the entire cabin would collapse. I braced myself, closing my eyes as the shaking intensified. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The room fell silent. The air, which had felt thick and suffocating, now seemed to lift. The oppressive weight that had been pressing on me for so long evaporated, leaving me breathless but free. I opened my eyes slowly, heart pounding in my chest. The creature was gone. The altar, now dark and still, stood before me. The symbols that had once glowed faintly now fading into nothing. The room was quiet. The shadows, once alive and swirling, had disappeared. I was shaking, exhausted, but I could feel something deep within me, a sense of finality. I had done it. I had bound the creature again, but at what cost? I turned, my gaze sweeping the cabin. It was still standing, the old wooden walls no longer groaning. The air smelled faintly of dust and decay, but it felt cleaner. The weight of the curse, of the thing that had haunted this place for generations, had been lifted. But as I stood there, trying to steady my breath, a nagging thought lingered in my mind. The journal had warned me. The ritual wasn't permanent. There was always the chance that the creature could return, that the cycle would begin again. I had bought myself time, yes, but not forever. A sudden sound broke my thoughts, a soft, distant scratching noise. The floorboards shifted slightly, a small, almost imperceptible tremor, like a warning that things weren't over. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Had I truly sealed the creature away? Or had I merely delayed the inevitable? I turned toward the basement door, the hole where the creature had risen. The air felt heavier again, as if it was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision. But I couldn't stay here, not anymore. The cabin, with all its dark secrets, had become more than I could handle. I had to leave. Whatever it was that waited for me, whatever it was that still lingered in the dark, it would find me again, but not here, not now. As I turned to leave, I glanced one last time at the altar, and then I ran. I didn't stop running. My feet pounded against the wooden floor as I dashed toward the stairs, ignoring the creaks and groans of the old structure beneath me. The air in the cabin was thick again, and I could feel it pressing against me, suffocating me. But I didn't look back. The whispers, the scratching, and the weight of something ancient still haunted the edges of my mind. I had escaped, or so I thought. As I reached the front door, I flung it open with a violent push, not pausing to look behind me. I had to get out of the woods. I had to leave this place before whatever had been trapped here found a way back. But just as my foot crossed the threshold, a voice, soft but clear, sounded from somewhere in the dark corners of the cabin. It was the same voice I had heard earlier, that low, guttural rasp that had been in my head ever since I stepped inside this cursed place. "You cannot leave." I stopped dead in my tracks, the air freezing in my lungs. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, the presence. It was there, waiting, watching. Even though I had performed the ritual, even though I had thought I sealed the creature away, it was clear now that it had never truly left. It was still tied to me, to this cabin. I was no longer just a visitor. I had become a part of its story, the bloodline, the last keeper, and that was a fate I couldn't escape. With my heart pounding in my chest, I took one last step toward freedom, my foot crunching the dry leaves underfoot as I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, but the night was still, the kind of stillness that presses down on you like the weight of an ancient curse. The trees swayed, their branches casting long shadows across the ground. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, shifting in the moonlight, waiting for something or someone to make their move. I tried to ignore the feeling that I was being followed, the sensation that eyes were on me, even though I was alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I walked further away from the cabin, back toward the town. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how much distance I put between myself and that cursed place, the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as though the creature had marked me, and no matter how far I ran, it would always find me. I glanced over my shoulder once, just to reassure myself that nothing was lurking in the woods, nothing was following me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for the right moment. As I reached the edge of the forest and stepped back into the town, the sky seemed to grow darker, the wind colder. The first glimmer of dawn was still far off, and yet the world felt suffocatingly small, as though the shadows from the woods were closing in around me. I didn't know what was truly waiting for me. I didn't know if I had broken the curse for good, or if it had merely been delayed. But one thing was clear: I wasn't free. The cabin in the woods had become a part of me, a chapter in a story that would never end. And as I walked away, the whispers followed me, growing louder and clearer, until they were no longer just in my mind. They were real, and they were watching.